Welcome. I'm Clark Korb, a holistic health practitioner offering some pragmatic insights to help you live a happier, more empowered life and embody your optimum potential. Today, I will be examining the broad notion of creative art, the passion which fuels its generation, and the role which production plays in relationship between these two. So, art or the creative process is really broad in its classification, not just limited to modalities of painting or theater or dance or music or any of the generative activities that we tend to consider the arts, distinct from the sciences, if you will. Healing modalities are often regarded as being part of the broad category of healing arts, for example. There's an author I've followed for years, particularly more in the late 2010s, I would say, following his blog for years. His name is Seth Godin, and he published a book in 2020 called The Practice, Shipping Creative Work. And I just recently came upon this book, even though he published it 5 years ago. And it's something that really, to me, resonated with a lot of the messaging and the ideas that he'd been publishing in his blog from the years beforehand. And in this book, he defines creativity as the result of a desire to find a new truth, solve an old problem, or serve someone else. He also defines art as the act of doing something that might not work simply because it's a generous thing to do, the combination of talent, skill, craft, and point of view that brings new light to old problems. He also states that art is when we're able to create something new that changes someone, and that this art or creating of art requires a practice that we've chosen to commit to. So I think it's generally understood or believed that art is associated with being creative, and that creativity is often associated with having a passion of some sort. And is whether passion is something that is inspired divinely or derived internally from process is, I think, a little bit of up to something that's up to debate. In this book, Seth Godin proclaims that passion is not from inspiration at all, that we're not reliant upon a muse per se, but rather that passion is simply work we've trusted ourselves to do. And he goes so far as to saying doing what you love is kind of a mantra for amateurs as opposed to loving what you do being a mantra for professionals. My personal experience with this is a little bit mixed. I believe that we are all curators of what piques our individual interest or curiosity, and also what feels valuable to us individually. Ultimately, in those things that bring us joy, no one else can really determine that for us. And what makes us feel joy with certain activities or stimuli, or why are we drawn to certain things? Don't really know. And I personally believe that developing a passion for something requires this initial spark of interest somehow. This spark ignites a curiosity to learn more about whatever topic it is. It may develop into a passion. And this spark is really only discovered through exposure and experimentation. It's something when we feel that spark, I believe, is in alignment with our inner being. It's something that's saying, there's something here for me. There's something that this lights me up in a certain way. And it may or may not be influenced by closest advisors or family or community members. I can think back to several sparks that I had ignited in my childhood as early passions, if you will. My interest in music was strongly encouraged by my parents, and that turned into a passionate study and practice for me throughout childhood and into adolescence. I was also interested in math and computers and physics. That was really piqued by interest in exposure at school in various grades. And that turned into its own passionate study for me throughout college, grad school, and ultimately my first career in electrical engineering. By contrast from those things, also as a child, I had an interest in wheels, in things that were automotive, basically. And that began long before I had any practical experience with wheels. I wasn't exposed to any car people in my family per se, or mechanics. I didn't have any mechanical understanding of cars, but I was drawn to them. So in contrast to Seth Godin's definition around this, I had no work or no experience that I was trusting myself to develop in this area. I just really dug cars. I loved playing with remote-controlled cars. I loved watching car-related shows on TV. And it wasn't until my late 20s when I was inspired to learn to ride a motorcycle after my curiosity was piqued by visiting an exhibition called The Art of the Motorcycle, where there was this detailed history of motorcycle design, and I was just drawn to ride. I thought, I don't have any experience with motorcycles, but I think that's something I'd really like to do, is learn how to ride a motorcycle. So as a child, I really didn't have any influences that were directly pointed to or having me surrounded by automotive enthusiasts. It's something that intrinsically lit me up. And as I became an adult and could indulge in automotive joy or being an enthusiast, it's something that I've enjoyed as at a recreational level for years now. So aside from these examples in childhood where I was intrigued and had an initial spark of curiosity that ignited some passionate study and pursuing of interests, it wasn't until my professional career, in fact, my second career, that really sort of came out of the blue, where I felt like I was developing and really honing my true art, my true offering to the world in a way that was aligned with an internal passion and something that I could commit to in the way that Seth Godin describes his definition of passion, which is giving yourself permission to do that kind of work. And I did a whole video on this, Taking the Leap of Faith, if you're interested in more detail about that. But essentially, I had relatively little to no exposure to my current industry before I quit my job. I was actually inspired by taking this leap of faith after I had taken an introductory course as more or less a palate cleanser and kind of a personal development exercise after I had quit my job and was looking to sort of clear the palate before I would do something else. And this course really provided a critical exposure to something which resonated with me deeply. And I don't believe without that critical spark, that's something that lit me up inside from being exposed to this kind of work in that initial course, even though what I do now has evolved significantly from what I was taught in that course, my passion was nonetheless sparked by this exposure. And it was the kind of thing I think that's necessary for us to commit a significant amount of work that we're going to trust ourselves to do, essentially taking that leap of faith. And this is what aligns with Seth Godin's definition of work that I trusted myself to do. But again, I believe both components are necessary, that this leap of faith was sparked by an alignment that was previously unknown to me, being an intrinsic desire to connect with, to serve, and ultimately to help other people in a significant way that I hadn't before. So having exposure to something that lights you up is great, and committing to developing your craft or your art in that way is fantastic. But the essential component that Godin argues, and that I also agree is essential, is actually production within the art. And production is not just practicing it. The practice is actually in the production. In fact, medical and legal professions are often called practices. This implies that well-qualified, highly educated, even lengthily credentialed professionals are always practicing by way of producing. And so this way of production is something that is required for all creative types to realize their fullest potential. If you're just practicing the mechanics or fundamental skills of a particular art, that's certainly necessary, but it's insufficient for optimum growth in your given art. For example, musicians perform scales, arpeggios, play chords, and they can practice with the metronome on their own, but ultimately they need to jam or play or perform with other people to elevate their craft. Similarly, athletes need to perform strength training, practice calisthenics, whatever their sport is, they're throwing, catching, swinging, but whatever they are ultimately doing in terms of a productive sport, they need to play or compete with others to raise their game to a higher level. I went to a concert with a wonderful jazz duo this past weekend, Christian McBride on bass and Brad Meldo on piano, and Christian McBride was describing an experience early in his career of playing 6-hour jam sessions starting at 10 p.m., playing till 4 a.m., and they only received minimal pay, basically just donation-based pay as a result of handing a hat around at the end of the jam session, and that this wasn't something done for the production of necessarily generating great income, but it was very much a character-forming experience and the kind of elevation of their play that they otherwise wouldn't have just practicing at home. And in my internalization of all this, production is really what fans the flame of a spark of curiosity into a sustainable, slow-burning fire of passion that ultimately helps you really create your art and elevate it to a high level. Another brilliant musician, Jacob Collier, was describing in a recent interview that general advice that was given to him within the music industry was first define your voice and then make a bunch of records. But he was stating that in actuality, that's really backwards, and that you need to make a bunch of records in order to find your voice. In other words, you need to produce in order to actually find your voice more fully and more accurately in its best form as an artist. Seth Godin refers to production in this form as shipping. So shipping is sharing with the world what you create. Fortunately, in this day and age, we have more tools and leverage of technology than we've ever had in the past, and many of these tools are free. We're no longer limited by gatekeepers to share or express our art. Anyone can self publish, whether it's of written word, of audio, or video. Classical artists, such as musicians, dancers, actors, writers, painters, sculptors, they can all publish or perform their art or do both. At the very least, if you don't have a venue that you can lease or be hired by to perform, you can at least publish on your own. Teachers can offer classes or workshops. Healers can work with clients one-on-one or in groups, and we're often, in many cases, not tethered to a physical location with that. So if you do not yet have any clients or students yet, if you're in the healing or teaching realms, you can start by volunteering. Getting your hands-on experience in this regard not only helps you develop your skill, but also exposes your work to others. And you can also self-publish. This really helps clarify your intention, find your inner voice, and attract your tribe. And I would really recommend, if you're doing this, to detach from the expected outcome that it simply be a marketing method or a funnel filler, so to speak. In my own personal examples, I've abided by the fundamentals of production or of shipping in my practice for the last 20 years, and now I've been doing it with this YouTube channel for the past 6 months. So producing or shipping, it feels scary. I understand that. It feels like you're being exposed, and you are being exposed. Once you make your work public, your art is no longer some idea that's rattling around inside your head. It's no longer a private brainstorming session, a daydream, or a catharsis that you've emptied into a journal. And all those things are great in their own right, but they're not shipping. Shipping or producing requires a certain discipline. It's a commitment to produce something that draws upon internal resources that you have and develops your capability in a way that you otherwise never likely would access if it's something that you are not sharing with the world. This discipline is expressed in the way you show up for another person or for people at large than you would just thinking about these ideas or mentalizing on your own. This is really what distinguishes something as being a hobby or a profession, independent of whether you make any money from it or not. How you show up, how you treat it is something, whether it's like a hobby or a profession. Shipping or producing also requires design of proper constraints. I did a whole video on this, creating space via constraints. I'll put the link to that in the description below as well. This set of constraints really helps you clarify and better shape your vision with the resources you have available to you. What defines the deliverables of what you're shipping and at what frequency? Shipping also implies the use of a deadline. Sharing with other people requires some agreement as to when you produce a deliverable, i.e., whether it's an appointment with a client or publishing something periodically. And the shipping also makes you vulnerable to external feedback. And here it's important to learn to discern constructive versus non-constructive feedback. When you receive constructive feedback, it's essential to express appreciation for and learn from this feedback, from this well-qualified constructive feedback. This is an enormous gift to help you improve your craft. And this is a way to get perspective that you can't see from your own internal biases. Also, equally important is learning to reject or ignore or not to give any credence to non-constructive feedback. Listening to people who are from this realm really can tend to shut down an artist or a dreamer or a creator. And people who are not enthusiasts, people who don't share their value for what you offer, do not recognize what you're offering as art. They tend to judge something they do not understand or something that they do not value. Seth Godin refers to these folks in his book as selfish critics, those who prefer the status quo. In my observation, hypercritical people like this are usually projecting their own sense of self-loathing. This is the classic kind of armchair quarterback type of individual. And often it's someone who has little to no production of their own art, or they feel resentment about their own art's lack of positive reception by other people. In this regard, they may think, well, no one else knows what good art is, only I do. Of course, they don't recognize my art as good art, that kind of thing. In conclusion, I believe the world needs more people producing their own art, as we broadly defined it here. And to reiterate Seth Godin's words, I want to encourage those who have a desire to find a new truth, solve an old problem, or serve someone else. For those who bring a combination of talent, skill, craft, and point of view that brings new light to old problems, or those who create something new that changes someone else for the positive. I'll add that in. Whether you're a classically trained artist or a nascent entrepreneur, healer, teacher, consultant, or anyone else wanting to improve your impact on the world, I really encourage you to lean into and embrace production. This will help you take your art to a new level and simultaneously fan that spark of curiosity into a sustainable and very satisfying passion. What about this resonates with you? Let me know in the comments below. If you know of anyone who may benefit from what I've shared here, please forward this video to them. And if you found some value in what I've discussed today, I would certainly appreciate your giving this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It's free, it only takes a moment, and it really helps support the growth of the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in.